Our second reading today comes from Acts chapter 16, verses 35 through 40. Listen now for the word of the Lord. When morning came, the magistrates sent the police, saying, "Let those men go." And the jailer reported the message to Paul, saying, "The magistrates sent word to let you go. Therefore come out now and go in peace." But Paul replied, "They have beaten us in public, uncondemned, men who are Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison, and now they are going to discharge us in secret? Certainly not. Let them come and take us out themselves." The police reported these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Roman citizens. So they came and apologized to them, and they took them out and asked them to leave the city. After leaving the prison, they went to Lydia's home, and when they had seen and encouraged the brothers and sisters there, they departed. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So the other night, I took a little adventure. I was going to meet a friend in downtown Jacksonville for drinks, and I decided, again, not knowing the etiquette of the inner city area, I ignored all of the parking garages and decided I was going to park on the street. Now, I just moved here from a small town where all the parking is free all the time. There's no meters anywhere, and there's parking spaces galore. So I'm going around, I see the place where I'm supposed to go, and I cannot find a parking spot. So I end up in this street where I probably should not have been. It was dark. The streets just a few blocks down were very active. There was some sort of a party going on. Apparently they do this every Friday. There was dancing out in the streets. There was jazz music. There were people everywhere. But this particular street that I chose as a single woman at night, utterly alone, was not very well trafficked. And so I pull up my car, I get out of the car, and I'm thinking to myself, I shouldn't have done this. But it was the only place to park. And so I lock the doors and I see the meter and I'm like, oh, here we go. This is going to be expensive. I go over to the meter and I take out my credit card and I see this man, this fully grown man running at me, ma'am. And I'm thinking in my head, oh my gosh, I'm about to get robbed. I'm about to get hurt. They're going to take me somewhere. This is the end. Nobody's going to know where I was. I have made a vital mistake. I am in danger right now. And this man's still running at me, and I'm white-knuckling my credit card thinking, what do I do? And my face is about like this. And suddenly the man, I think he could see the whites in my eyes, and he stops hard. And he goes, ma'am, the meter's free after 6 p.m. And it's funny now. But I was in a section of the city where the culture was different than the one that I grew up in. I was in a section of the city where, with my hair and my skin, I stood out. I was like a stranger in a strange land, and as a woman, and admittedly, and I'm not proud of this, I am short in stature, but that half inch on that 5'4" really does matter. I think I'm tough stuff. But when this man came running at me, I filled up with fear and I froze. But this man was only trying to help me. You know, I believe one of life's biggest blessings can be found when we are pleasantly surprised after underestimating or thinking wrongly of someone. First, making that mistake and doubting them. And we tend to do this, I think, more often than we consciously notice. We have ideas about types of people or animals that we have learned as a way to survive. For example, the misconception that all pit bulls are mean. You know, pit bulls are not born mean. They are made mean by mean people. And the same thing happens to us as humans. We're not born thinking less of someone else because they are different than us. That is something that we are taught. Now, sometimes these stereotypes aren't ill-intended at all, but they are modes of survival. I mean, if you are a small woman, such as myself, in a strange place, which, by the way, I knew better, Like, what was I doing? But if you're a small woman in a strange place and a fully grown man is running at you, yeah, be frightened. It's okay to be frightened because while we know that it is not all men, it is some men. And therefore, all women must be wary of all men, especially when alone in a strange place. It's just a basic survival measure. Now, on the other hand, these judgments can be extremely harmful. For example, assuming that black cats are evil and bad luck. The prejudice against black cats actually leads to lower adoption rates from the shelters and higher euthanasia rates, and even more street kills of black cats. Now, their only crime was being born with black fur. Amongst humans, it could be something like assuming that because a young boy is hyperactive, he must have ADHD. Now, when a child is misdiagnosed with ADHD, it can cause them long-term harm to their social and educational growth. It labels them in a way that every teacher they have from that point on is going to treat them differently. And we might be missing something else. In our series, we have found that women in the Bible are often underestimated because they're women. Women have historically been underestimated and therefore overlooked and undervalued. Just like black cats or energetic little boys, their only crime was being born a certain way. In our story today, before Paul makes the journey to Philippi, he's actually given a vision in his dreams, and that vision is of a man calling out to him from Macedonia to travel to Philippi. He sees a man in that vision. So imagine Paul's surprise when he gets there and it was actually truly a woman. I wonder if in that time, and I love Paul, but I wonder if that vision had been of a woman, would he have taken it seriously? I like to imagine that as the Apostle Paul and his friends, as they're making their way to the outskirts of the city of Philippi, and they saw these women gathered down by the river outside the city walls, these Gentile believers in the Jewish Yahweh God, that both of these groups must have had an element of surprise in their eyes. You see, these women were gathered together discussing the scriptures and worshiping, and they look up to see this group of foreign men walking towards them. And were they filled with bewilderment and perhaps an element of fear? Just as I was standing at the meter, wondering what the heck was going on, why was this strange man approaching me? Or were they wondering if perhaps this was the authorities coming to break up this worship session that they were having? After all, these were Gentiles. This is why they were on the outside of the city walls. They could not worship Yahweh inside with the Jewish people. Now, from Paul's point of view, he was asking God, perhaps, if he had made a wrong turn? Or did he see these group of women and just suddenly know that this is where he was supposed to be? This was the group that he was supposed to approach. We know that the Apostle Paul was nicknamed the Apostle to the Gentiles, for he was the one who took the gospel beyond the Jewish tribes and out to the rest of the world. And the scripture says, opened Lydia's heart to hear the words of Paul as he approached them. And upon seeing this foreign man approach her, rather than fear and hardening her heart and closing up the walls around her, she is open. She is receiving. She is accepting of something from someone that she did not know and had absolutely zero reasons to trust. Now, though all of my little stranger danger antennas are going crazy on this story, Lydia could not have been a very gullible woman. She could not have been a very clueless woman. I mean, when you think of me in downtown Jacksonville standing at the meter, yeah, you can call me clueless and naive. But Lydia was a self-made, wealthy businesswoman who owned and ran a successful household without any husband to provide for her, living in a man's world. This woman must have had so much wit about her. She must have been so intelligent and discerning to be able to make happen in that time. Lydia was the very first convert to Christianity in Europe. That's amazing. As Paul begins to walk away, she lets him know that her home is always open to him, anytime that he should come back. And it's also open to those who should travel alongside of him. And despite him going into the city and being publicly arrested and beaten and thrown into prison and then banned from said city, they told him, just please leave, right? When he knocks on her door, after all of that, she still takes him in. She does not question, what did you do? Why did you do it? She invites him in. No questions asked. The gesture of her hospitality may not be advisable in the world that we live in today. I wouldn't advise going around opening your doors to just anybody, because today things are a lot different. We have the stranger danger, but that gesture of hospitality remains a vital part of our faith, though with safety practices, it might look a little bit different today. So while I'm not asking you to open the doors to your house and just let anybody in where your children are living, we don't have to know a person to show them kindness and provide them with basic comforts and dignity. See, today, especially within the church, we can do things like fund and volunteer for places like Compassion House down the street, a place that opens its doors to any who have need and gives them fresh clothes to wear, good food to eat, a bed to sleep in, a place to feel welcome. Or perhaps we can help someone to pay for one night in a hotel, just to help them get back on their feet again. In the winters or in hurricanes, we open up the church itself as a shelter, a place that is safe to rest. This place is literally a sanctuary. Now, the next day, she lets Paul know that her entire household would like to be baptized. And this is the first instance where we hear of an entire household being baptized. This is one of the premises, by the way, for Presbyterian baptism of infants. To know that it wasn't just adults, but it was entire households coming to be baptized. And this then begins the very first church in Philippi, and perhaps the very first church in Europe. Her home becomes a sanctuary space for worship. And now Paul, he never accepted money from any of the churches. That was a point of pride for him. He had his own trade, and he did what he did for free, advising several churches. But this church, there was something about this church, because this is the only church that Paul accepted money from. Now, one would not look upon a woman who is without a husband and expect her to have such great means as to make such a significant contribution to the growth of a religious movement. This story in which someone who would have been underestimated and overlooked, this was truly a blessing in disguise. How many people in our lives do we overlook not knowing what's really there? I mean, honestly, both Paul thought that he was meeting with a man, remember? He makes all this travel because he thinks that he is meeting with a man. And Lydia, who had no reason to trust him, she opened her heart to receive the gospel, and then she opened her home and gave her funds to a stranger. Both of them, through the gifts of faith, vulnerability, and open-mindedness, found blessings in each other. Through God is the one who brought these two together into friendship, and wasn't it a beautiful thing? Now today up here, you might notice that liturgically we have broken some rules. We have purple up here in the sanctuary. The color currently is supposed to be green on our liturgical calendar. But today I wanted to go all out for Lydia. I mentioned that she was a seller of purple cloth. This stuff couldn't just be bought anywhere. It was because of her success in selling purple cloth that the gospel was able to more easily spread through Europe. Did you know that purple is the color of royalty, and in those times, it was the color of royalty because the plant that is used to make the dye was very rare. It was only found in certain areas, like the city that Amy read for us earlier, Thyatira, which is where Lydia was originally from. Now, we might be wondering, why was Lydia not still in Thyatira? Why was she now in Philippi? Well, you see, back then, depending on the city you lived in, that's the god that you worshipped. They didn't have religious freedom back then the way that we so enjoy today. So in Thyatira, the people there were worshiping the god of Thyatira. So she moves a small distance to Philippi, where she is free to worship the God that truly has her heart. And she continues to take these plants, make the purple dye, and make it into a purple cloth and sell it. And it's really amazing. This color purple, because that we know that it was used for royalty back then, this is the color of Lent. And we use it during Lent to remind us that Christ has a kingship and a lordship over all people. Christ is our true king, and so we would dress him in purple. Now, the color purple, however, also today in psychology has meanings of contemplation and creativity. The university that I attended for undergraduate, the University of Arizona, has an entire courtyard where everything is purple. The benches are purple because they wanted to give the students a place of serenity, a place where they could sit and truly have creativity flow through them. It stimulated the imagination. That is what the color purple does. So if you're ever feeling down or stuck, go sit in a purple room. I swear it works. And the very first suffragette movement actually used purple as a color to symbolize that every single suffragette who was fighting for the equal right to vote had royal blood pumping through her veins. Now, if you have any young friends that are Generation Alpha or Generation Z, you might hear them say, "Yes, Queen, slay!" Seriously, that is what we are saying. Every suffragette who got out into the streets and started fighting for their right to be considered as an equal citizen had the blood of a queen pumping through her veins. You didn't actually have to genetically have that, but you were made a queen just based off of who you are. And so therefore, purple is the color of spirited and independent women. I bet we all know some of those in our lives. Now, purple is also the color of international women's movement for equality. This movement believes that women's rights to equality, that harassment in the workplace and on the streets, and sexism in any form should not be tolerated in any industry or by any political party. Human rights should simply not be a partisan issue. Now, by combining the party colors of red and blue, we have been gifted with the color purple. So hence, on International Women's Day, which is March 8th every year, we see the color purple everywhere we look. Now, in the church world, we will often call churches a red church or a blue church or a purple church. How many of you have heard those terms before? I'm very curious. Okay, not everybody. So when I am asked about Palms Presbyterian Church, I have to say I feel so blessed and so fortunate to say that this, my friends, this is a purple church. Now that means that we come together for every fellowship event, every worship time, and every Bible study, knowing that the people around us might vote differently in political settings. They might hold different values within our nation, different values within their home, but we come together recognizing that the gospel is greater than any of that. Today, I asked the children if they like chocolate or vanilla, if they like dogs or cats. I could ask much more controversial things, and I think all of us would not raise our hands the same exact way, but that one question, are you here in worship today? And everyone raised their hands. That is what a purple church is. And it is a miracle. We sit in these people with love and kindness because they are people. They are God's children. They are not the things that they vote for. And that is so important for us to remember. Now, when I set out to preach this mini-series, my goal was actually to highlight how God calls and empowers all types of people to service. God loves and cherishes all people, no matter the body that they came in, to go out and spread the gospel through word and act and deed, and each is called to be a preacher in their own right. Every single one of you here today is a preacher through the way that you live your life and through the words that you choose to use. Y'all are queens and kings. You are purple people, people of the purple. I mean, look around you right now. Look around. There's not a single person in here who is just like you. Isn't that great? I mean, if we all were exactly the same, this world would be so boring. So this is wonderful. I mean, we're all different and we all believe different things, but we come together in this space with the same God. We love the same God, and that is pretty epic. That is pretty purple. Now, these past 3 weeks, we have heard the stories of Rahab, the prostitute in Jericho, who took a leap of faith in times of great turmoil. We heard the story of the nameless enslaved girl in 2 Kings who risked everything for the welfare of an enemy. And we heard the story last week of Hagar, who was an enslaved and used Egyptian woman in the story of Abraham and Sarah, but who was seen and blessed by God. Now, each of these women demonstrated great courage and faith and vulnerability. And though their stories may be lesser known, they are not less important or less timeless than the others. These were stories that defied the odds and made it into our canon. Remember, the very first week we talked about the stories that actually make it into the Bible. And the fact that stories of women actually made it meant that they were absolutely incredible. Because society didn't allow for that sort of thinking. Now, this also makes these lesser known stories, with these few stories of a few women in the Bible, how many stories are we missing? How many stories never made it and were forgotten to time? And when we take time to read and explore the stories of the historically marginalized, we are spiritually fed and enriched by what we encounter. When I first announced that we were doing this series, y'all might remember I was standing out here in the middle and I said, I know Brian's God, but this isn't, let Emily play. I was totally having the time of my life. But I will say, when else are we going to cover these stories? Now, the response that I got from that announcement was interesting. And I was a little bit worried. I was a little bit nervous about it. The response that I heard, there were whispers, is that some people didn't feel like this sermon series was going to be for them. And that's fine. We don't feel attached to everything. We don't love every sermon. Don't tell me if you don't like this one later. But I heard that response. And I was worried about this, and I thought about it, and I came up with 2 responses in my head. Now, the more pastoral response was, it is important to grow by encountering what is different from ourselves in order to gain a better insight into the magnitude of God's love for God's creation. That is why this is so important. Now, the sassy response in me said, well, welcome to what women experience every single time they come to church and have to hear yet another story about some accomplishment of some man. Okay? I got an applause. Yes, queen, whoever you are, thank you. But this is important to me. It holds a special place in my heart when I look out and I see young girls in our congregations. It is important to me that I show up as a pastor and I show up as my best self, because not many churches have female pastors. I didn't when I was a little girl, and I didn't think that I could become one. But it is so important that little girls know that they can grow up to be whatever they can dream of. But more than that, it's important for every person to know that they can be whatever they can dream, whatever they can work towards. And I want to be one of the helpers. It's important to me as a young, single female pastor that every person who comes to church, no matter their skin color, ability level, marital status, profession, height, weight, gender, etc., can all feel like they know that they belong because they are represented equally as God's own in this enormous and awesome love of God. For everything that you are, there is a story about someone in the Bible that you can relate to. Just because we don't cover it in the pulpit doesn't mean that it's not there. You, no matter how you come to be here, you have equal importance and calling on your life, just as the person next to you does. By highlighting these stories of the historically marginalized, we uplift that recognition and that importance within God's vision of the kingdom. So this series, even though it's called Lesser Known Women of the Bible, this was never meant to be about women's gender. It's about the content of their character and the ways in which God called them to do incredible things. Paul writes that in God there is no male or female, no Jew or Greek, no slave or free. We are all one. God doesn't see us as the containers of our souls, but sees our souls and uses them for good. And if only we could treat each other that way. I think Martin Luther King Jr. said something to that effect. And here we are, still battling that. This is the way that small children see one another, and truly I do believe that small children are closer to God than any of us could ever hope to be at this point. We should be taking notes from children on how to love others and how to show goodness in this world. As much as we teach children, we should be open and receptive to what they can teach us. Because the way they see the world is the way that God sees the world. God loves you for the things that make you who you are. God doesn't look at you and see a man or see a woman or a young or old person or whatever you are, because truly we're all just purple inside. Purple is beautiful. And purple is the miracle of God's love and grace and hope. So thank God that the people of the Bible came in all shapes and sizes and colors and situations, because we know that each of us can find someone and identify with them, no matter who you are. This series was for you. You are known. You might be lesser known by society, but you are known and you are called by God no matter what container you came in, no matter what has happened to you in your life. You are equally important. Lesser known is the fault of our society, but God knows us each more intimately than we will ever know ourselves, and God calls us by names and makes us kings and queens and gives us a seat at the welcome table decked out in purple to celebrate all the mix of things that make you who you are and me who I am, and all of us as we are together. So friends, give thanks to God that this world is not truly meant to be divided up, but it is beautiful and it is purple, and all of us can come together to this place knowing that we are loved and cherished. Lesser known, well known, God knows us all. Amen.